Hello, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us as we have the TBC Power Hour for October 2019, introducing the Trimble X7 and the Trimble X7 scanning solution with Trimble Business Center. We have a whole slew of folks on the call today. The main man, Richard Hassler, fresh out of a prison stint, it looks like in that picture. He likes to use that picture, and we like to give him a hard time about it. But Richard will be driving for most of the day, or most of the session. My name is Joe Blecka. I'm associated with Trimble Business Center, former product manager, now into the market manager role. And we are also fortunate to have Chris Trevelyan with us, who has recently taken the GNSS marketing director position, but had been instrumental and is instrumental in the release of the X7 laser scanner system. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining. Quick overview of what we'll be talking about today. So an introduction to the X7 laser scanner, and then the Trimble Perspective field software that controls it in the field, as you may have guessed. And then to really complete the solution, again, we're not just selling boxes here, we're selling the solutions. Either diving into Trimble Business Center or Trimble RealWorks on the office software side, and this is the TBC Power Hour, so we'll be talking about Trimble Business Center. A quick note on the Trimble Business Center before I unleash Richard here. The demo today will be with the Survey Advanced Edition with the scanning module, and TBC version 520, which as of the recording today, October 30th in the US, is not yet released. Look for that in Q4. So coming up here, all of TBC 520 will be able to support everything that you see, and Richard's running a TBC version 520 today in the demo. So with that, I will shut up and get to the good stuff of the X7 system and how the X7 data fits within Trimble Business Center.
Okay, I wanted to cover just a few slides, maybe 6 or 8 of them, that describe the X7 system and all of its its components as they pertain to the topics that we'll be showing in Trimble Business Center. It is the latest new product that Trimble Geospatial has produced, actually, and it was announced recently, and it has 3 basic tenets or 3 basic drivers for its vision. We wanted it to be very simple for the customer to use as a scanner. So in the field, you can take advantage of many different pieces or many different workflows using very simple interface, a new software that's in the field, and really produce answers and produce data in the field very simply. It has quite a few technologies included, and we'll talk very, very briefly about each of those or some of those. And those technologies help you to obtain what I would call field deliverables that are previously not seen typically with scanning solutions. And then professional in that it is a full-blown high-end scanner, well, I could say high-speed laser scanner that produces very, very good quality data and can deliver very accurate and measurements in the field. Okay.
I should have noted, if you have any questions, please, we encourage you to type them in to the question window. We've got plenty of time either to answer them live during the session, or they are logged with your email address. We're happy to reach out to you afterwards. So if you've got any questions about this or the workflows, please let us know.
Okay. So it's important, if we're going to talk about the X7 system, to mention that it not only is a laser scanner with a nice set of cameras in it, it can do, I don't know, 500,000 points a second kind of speeds. It can collect very nice data very quickly, but it also can take panoramic imagery using those cameras, and it talks via Wi-Fi connection to a field tablet, the T10, or others if you happen to have something else. And it can communicate, collect the scan data, and while you're doing the scanning, it sends back this, it collects the scan data on the scanner. Then you can start panoramic imagery, and you have full control using the T10 over what kind of data collection you'd like it to do. And if it's collecting panoramic images, it's sending the scan data over to the tablet while it's collecting the panoramas. And then once they're done, they will be sent to the tablet. So on the tablet, you can see the scan data as it's coming in, and it also has the ability to, and I'll get to that, if you look in the picture, produce automated registration in the field. So it can link your scan data together. And it also has, because you are looking at your scan data in the field as it's being put together, you have the ability to add annotations and or labels to those data, which will provide downstream benefits and give you kind of an interactive feel that many scan users aren't used to. A lot of scanners, you just start up in the field, collect the data, move to your next point, collect the next set of scans, and move to the next point, and so forth. This gives you a much more interactive in-field capabilities and the ability to actually mark up the data to provide value back in the office. Okay, so starting with the automated registration, it's a smart system that uses the IMU that's in the scanner together with the fact that it has pretty precise self-leveling, and you can collect a scan, move to your next point, and by default, it will register scan 2, say, to scan 1, and scan 3 to scan 2, and just move through your site. And as it's registering the data, that helps you visualize to see if you have any holes in your data where you failed to collect. Laser scanning is a line of sight type measurement system. So it lets you see if you have holes in your data that you need to fill in with additional scans before you leave the site, which is nice to know. And it also lets you know whether those data actually will register together. Sometimes you're in tough environments with lots of vegetation or other moving things that can cause trouble getting a registration to happen. And it's better to know that there are some trouble spots, and you might need to collect an extra scan or two to make sure you have enough overlap and enough data to get your registration to work before you leave the site. So it provides that capability of you knowing, all right, I'm secure, I have my scans, they are registering together, and I don't have any holes in my data for the object of interest that I need to collect. All right, in addition to being able to make sure you get the data collected well, you have the ability to mark up the data in 2 different ways. There's a thing called an annotation, which allows you to look at your site in the field and decide if you have very specific things that you'd like to point out to people downstream and back at the office who may be processing your data to make deliverables. You have the ability to select those on the screen from the scan data and add an annotation and tell them this is the, maybe it's this is the top of the piece that I need you to look at, or this is the particular valve that's of importance if you're doing a kind of a plant facility, and mark up those objects that you'd like to draw attention to back in the office. And additionally, you have the concept of labels, which is kind of like a tag that you can associate to each of your scans, and you can if you're doing a multi-story building, for example, you may want to identify that the scans you're doing in this particular area are on the 3rd floor. It can be difficult to tell when you're in the office looking at a multi-story building which floor is which just by looking at the scans themselves. So you can kind of more or less let the user know this group of scans all came from the 3rd floor, this group came from the northwest quadrant of the 3rd floor, and this is stairwell shots and those sorts of things between the 3rd and 4th floor. That way those data can be grouped back together in TBC, and I'll show that really quickly in a little bit. So a few extra tools that are kind of nice. Now the cameras in the device can be used to create panoramic images. And those panoramic images are used for a couple things. In the field, you can do a fast panorama just to kind of give you the ability to look around the site and see what was collected or see the objects that were collected. Maybe not. maybe a few more mismatches in those, but basically to get a quick idea of the site and captured in the field. Additionally, when you download the scan data from the Perspective software, you can create a higher quality or a better quality panorama that really looks really nice and can look at it in station views inside TBC, or if you like, and additionally, you could create a flat panoramic image, which basically is one kind of JPEG, large JPEG image of the whole scene as well. So panoramas are not only used just for visualizing themselves, but they also are used to colorize a point cloud, because scanning is basically a grayscale or black and white medium. And what you get from the scan data itself is not colorized. The panoramas are used to add the RGB values, the colorization to the scans. Okay, so the Perspective software and the data it produces with the X7 are meant to be used or be able to be used within TBC and RealWorks. There's a nice smooth data flow to take the data from Perspective to those two softwares, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. Basically, you may want to further inspect or visualize your registration in the office, perhaps even add some scans to it, or work with it and maybe refine it even more and get it to be a tighter registration. Or you can, inside the office softwares, extract various kinds of deliverables to produce and send downstream.
Richard and Chris, before we jump into the software side of it, Dennis has a couple of good questions here. What is the scan time and the image capture time with the system? And then what is the maximum range of the X7?
I'll defer to Chris for the answers.
Yeah, the scan times, we have 4 different options for scan times, either 2 minutes, 4 minutes, 7 minutes, or there's a 15-minute option. So there's just kind of 4 settings for duration, and then the maximum range on the unit is 80 meters.
Those scan times, Chris, that's point cloud collection and images?
Those are the point cloud collection plus the auto calibration and auto leveling. That doesn't include the images. The images take about an extra, call it a minute or so.
They're quite fast because it has 3 cameras. It can do them pretty quickly. So I did want to draw your attention to the fact that Chris has produced a really fine, comprehensive discussion or presentation on the X7 that can be found on the, I believe, on the geospatial.trimble.com site, that covers in detail many of the facets of the system that I'm kind of glancing over. In fact, these slides came from that presentation, and it's much more complete than what I'm going to cover today here. So if you're interested to follow up, I recommend you have a look at that on the geospatial site. Okay, so to start off my demo, ironically, I'm going to show you some screen snaps of Trimble Perspective. Now, this was a small site next to our building here in Colorado that was collected just kind of as part of a testing effort. So it's not finely polished or anything like that, but it demonstrates a few key aspects of the Trimble Perspective software and what's passed down into TBC. If you look at the screen, you can see that there are 3 distinct groups of stations that are linked together with those link lines. Those link lines indicate what the registration path is through the data. So if you look at the lower left, you can see that station 1 was collected, and then station 2 was collected and linked back to station 1. 3 was linked back to station 2. So during the field work, it's actually registering your scan data to the previous scan. By default, you have some control over which you want to link it to. So, and you can see that scan 6 was actually linked to scan number 4 rather than scan 5. So that's one set of scans that are all registered together or tied together in a group. In the middle, you see 7, 8, 9 is a different set, and then on the right-hand side, you see a number of scans that are all linked together. Each of those is distinctly a registration group, and they're not registered to each other. It's interesting how these data come in because they look like they're pretty darn close, amazingly. So the scanner has a pretty good ability to kind of know where it is already. So in the software in TBC, we will display those and allow you to work with those as 3 separate distinct registration groups. And we preserve that's work that happened from the field. Additionally, you can see in the lower center a TS pillar. That's an annotation indicating that that pillar is of interest and that the person in the office should pay attention to it. And there are a few other of those annotations visible on the right-hand side, machine target and Kubota. So those were put in there by the field operator saying, I think the office guy should pay attention to these points. And you'll see those displayed in TBC. And one last piece is that you can go back in and add labels to your scans and basically say, all right, I'm going to group these scans together so that when I get to the office software, I can see them as a group, essentially. And if you look at 3, 4, 5, and 6, that's indicating the rail pad is the group, and that's because these all are around the rail pad. And then scans 7 and 8 are indicating that the construction shack was the subject of interest of those scans. So it helps you to group your data together.
Richard mentioned everything that the Trimble perspective handles, so the registration, the ability to add labels and annotations. Jefferson asks about georeference. The georeferencing is possible in Trimble Business Center.
And I'll show that in just a few minutes. How accurate is
Is a good question from Dennis. Is there a minimum range for automatic registration in perspective?
Minimum range? I don't know the answer.
No, I don't think there's a minimum range. I mean, you just have to have a good overlap and good consistency between your scans. Other than that, I believe the minimum scan distance is 0.6 meters. So
0.6 meters.
But your scans could even be closer together than that and register still.
Yeah,
I would think. Yeah.
Yeah, they could be.
Yep. Why you want to do that, I'm not sure, but you could do. All right, so just to kind of take the continuous from Trimble perspective into TBC, we have had for some releases, I'm not sure how many, a Trimble TDX file format that's designed to help you transfer your scan data between our different software applications. And we've done an extensive amount of work on improving and in some cases even fixing the handling of the TDX format in TBC. But this allows you to transfer data between Trimble Perspective projects and between Trimble Perspective and RealWorks, Trimble Perspective and TBC, and between even TBC projects or TBC and RealWorks. And the reason that it's important is because this is the one format that will help you preserve your scan stations when transferring the data between different projects. Any other kind of point cloud format like the LAS or E57 is basically taking the entire cloud, and you kind of lose the concept of the scan stations. So you can't go and re-register, for example. It has a similar structure to the JXL file and access in that it's one small file with a folder full of the associated data. And those data include the imagery from the field and scan files from the field. If you use the tablet to take pictures that attach to annotations, they fall outside of that TDF folder and will be brought in separately when you import the TDX. Okay, so with that said, I wanted to show a quick project where I'm bringing in a TDX file, and just to show you how TBC addresses that. If you want to take a second and answer any of those questions while I'm doing this, that's fine.
Sure. So a couple more questions from Dennis. What is the overlap required? And will the camera or cameras take sufficient images for HDR panorama generation?
Yeah, so with the overlap, there's no real specific requirement. I mean, the more overlap, the better is a general rule. We find good success with the registration having 50 to 60% overlap or more. We've had low overlap in times, and the in-field registration has worked, but there's no real hard fast number situation.
Depends a bit on the subject matter, I think.
Exactly. If it's buildings and such, you can usually get by with less overlap. If it's out in the field, like the example Richard's showing, you may need more overlap. So it really is situational independent. For the second question, there is no HDR in the X7 today. So it will take the images and perform the white balance and everything necessary for the condition you are, but there's no HDR today for that.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, so I actually just dragged and dropped the TDX file into a blank TBC project to show you that when you do that with X7 data, you're prompted to basically choose whether you want to colorize the scan points. For some surveys, colorization is not necessarily important. You can uncheck that and it would quicken the import time. And you have the ability, if you do choose to colorize, to create a panorama image in a media file, which is that flat view of the panorama that I described before, one file that's a flat view, or you can make 3D panoramas to look at a station view in TBC and see the panoramic imagery. Okay, so that's really key point is that if, unlike the SX10, where you have separate images and later on can colorize your point cloud in the TBC at a later time, with the X7 data, you need to make this decision up front when you're doing the import. The nature of the panoramic imagery is different, and it requires that you make a choice to either colorize and or create the panos at import time, because you will not be given an opportunity to do that again later. Okay, so I'm just going to cancel that project quickly. And just a second. Come on. I want to kill this TBC, but my screen is. I want to drag.
Yeah, so there's a question about what techniques does the registration and perspective use. So perspective uses a cloud-to-cloud registration to do the pairwise registration. So you're not using targets in the field. And there was also a question there about sensors. So we're using the alignment or the orientation from the IMU as a good heading estimate to kind of help seed the algorithm, but it is a cloud-to-cloud technique.
On that same vein, it's also important to note that the self-leveling capability of the instrument and use of that IMU requires that to do the automatic leveling in the field that you leave the leveling on. So when you bring the data files into TBC, the level or lock of the zenith will be on for all of your scan data that was automatically registered. So you can deal with that in TBC if you choose to turn those off, or if you wish to leave them on, you can, and of course, perform registrations either way in TBC and refinements. So I brought in that data file from the project that you saw in perspective, and here's what in TBC, here's what a panoramic image looks like for that project, and you can see that people can photobomb themselves really nicely with the X7 scanner, and you can see the quality of the panos, and I can flip to a different one and show you kind of different part of the scene. The panos actually are pretty nice quality these days. There was some interesting early startup issues with them, but we've cleaned them up quite a bit and give you a very nice view of the project. Now, I have point cloud regions turned off. I can turn on point clouds, of course, in the station view at TBC and see the points overlaid on the pano if you choose. Wish to make some measurements using the point cloud or the scans. Also in the plan view, I'd like to point out that you can see these lines that look like the way TBC represents observations with straight lines between points. That's the annotation that was created in the field, and it relates it back to the scan that was used to pick the point and create the annotation. Now, these are just simple callouts with text saying there's a machine target here to look into. There's a Kubota tractor here. This one talks about a pillar, but if you'll note next to it, there's a small folder icon that indicates that I can click on that, pick a media folder, and then right-click and look at its picture. That indicates that some kind of media image or something was taken that go along with that particular annotation. And in fact, it's a photograph with the T10 from the T10 of the pillar itself, I believe. So.
Yeah, and one of the really nice things about supporting the X7 system in TBC was that we really didn't have to create any new objects or containers or new types. Everything, these annotations, and Richard will show the labels, and the station views and the panos, those were all existing constructs in TBC, and if anything, it made us look at those features and improve them. So obviously for X7 applications, but also other scanning applications, the SX10 data sets, for example, or those annotations are just treated like think of them like total station observations, where you're getting the vector information right there, as well as points and the media icon file folder, just how you would if you went out with an old TSE3 and took a shot next to a point in Trimble Access. It's supported the exact same way. So the learning curve for users in TBC with the X7 should be relatively low, where it just slides right into your existing workflows and existing features that you've been using, potentially for years in TBC.
Yep, and I don't know if you noticed that there were like duplicate light poles in there. When I showed this in perspective, there were different registration groups that had not been tied together. So you're seeing some duplicated. So this is a perfect data set where you would like to go in and do a little bit more registration in the office and tie those groups together. And to highlight that point, when I look at the registration groups that I'd like to use for reference, I have 3 separate groups from those different chain sets or those different registration sets that were created in the field. So I have the ability just after import to go ahead and register those data together and make a nice type unified picture of the scene. It looked pretty good to me, considering they hadn't even been registered, because oftentimes with scan data, that stuff's thrown all over the place, but that stuff actually came out looking pretty good. Okay, so that was my main topic to talk about here. I wanted to mention that this is a default project. This is a TDX file brought into a default project. So the data you see here are more or less just organized or huddled around the origin 000 for the default project. Now TBC, I'll switch to a different project. Arno might have to remind me how to do that easily. I can drag and drop, I believe, this project. TBC can scans data. So the way it does it is it brings the data in and effectively stores it in the database as ground. So it's important for the user when they're bringing in different kinds of scan data to ensure that they are selecting right options, if they exist, to bring those data in as ground data. And in this project, what I'm trying to show is that you have the ability, this is a Colorado State plane job. This is a government predefined coordinate system. Its origin is 1,000 kilometers from this job site. So when I bring in the X7 data, sure enough, they're landing at 00 from the import. Those are the coordinates that most scan data actually get by default in the field. So almost all scan data tends to come in at 00 unless it's coming in from maybe an aerial project. So it's important to want to get those data over into the vicinity of your project site so that you're sure that all the computations and the graphics are working very smoothly. It's challenging for any software package to simultaneously show you data that are 1,000 kilometers apart. And AutoCAD and SketchUp and many other products, when you try to put data that are really far from the origin, those products tend to have a lot of difficulties. Well, that's kind of almost the nature of the beast. The most products do. Well, so the best thing that you can do when you get in a data and want to marry together survey data like is shown in the right-hand side here, taken with the total station and with the RTK. And this is survey line work of an intersection.
Can you show the vectors real quick?
Yeah, I
just to prove this?
can.
So see the coordinates on the right are in the Colorado State Plain, where the coordinates on the left, if you see the grid there with the scan data.
So there's RTK vectors into many of these points, and the total station was set up on points that were measured using RTK, which is not uncommon practice these days. So we had 4 station setups for total station data collection, and you can see some of those total station observations here.
Those are the green vectors.
The green vectors. Those were collected with total station, although the rest was collected actually in this project with RTK. So my point is we've created line work from those survey data. I don't have any scan data to use, but I can still georeference these X7 scans to my survey data and have them cover the site uniformly. So the way to do that, and the first way you should probably think about using X7 data in TBC, if you're going to marry it together with survey data, the first thing you probably should do is georeference those data. So the georeference scans command allows you to do that. And all it asks for is a survey point and a corresponding scan point. So if you're planning to do this kind of marriage in the field or in the office, it's important for you to make sure that you collect using survey techniques points that are easily identifiable in the scans later so that you can associate those survey points to the scan points. And I can select as many as 12 points here in order to georeference these scan data to my project. Well, right now what I'm going to do is try to get the data from the 0, location where they're currently sitting and onto somewhere roughly onto the project site so they feel more comfortable with not stressing the system trying to go across such large distances. So I'll pick a scan point, or a survey point, excuse me, and let's say I'll just pick one of these. It's close enough for good measure. And then I'll pick a scan point that's roughly corresponding. This is just a rough exercise I'm doing here. Excuse me. And I'll hit georeference, and it goes through and it calculates the transformation and moves the data. So once it's done doing the georeferencing, it's important to actually run the comp engine. It will run automatically if I close the command. So I'll close the georeference command. And what you'll see is the scan data will, if it works the way it's supposed to, vanish from the scene, and now the data are no longer located at 0, and what you see are all the scan stations have appeared roughly in my project area. That indicates that the scan data now reside in the general vicinity of the project. So if I now zoom extents on the left-hand side, you can see that the data are no longer located near 0, but are located in coordinate values very close. Now I have a view filter turned on so you can't see the scan data on the right side of the screen intentionally. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a more precise georeference of these data and pick a couple points pretty carefully to try to get these scan data to land right on top of my survey data. And there are 2 points that I'd like to use to do this exercise, one of which is here. Excuse me, here.
While Richard is doing this, nice little quick tip, how he got so quickly to zoom extents in that left-handed view was a double click of the scroll wheel on the mouse. If you didn't know that, you can impress your friends with that little bit of knowledge in TBC. Real easy way to zoom extents with double click of the scroll wheel on the mouse.
So I'm going to pick a scan point that's roughly, excuse me, a survey point that roughly falls in the same general vicinity as my scan data here. And, okay, just looking at it. I want to maybe pick a little bit bigger points so I can see a little better. So that point I want to make sure is not in the grass so that it has a proper elevation, and pick something on the sidewalk very close to where that belongs. Okay, that gives me the option now, after it's picked that pair of points, to pick a second pair. And down near this grading, or near this road right here, there's a grading that was collected with multiple points here. And this point right here represents basically a flow line of the sidewalk next to a grading that exists. Why I always have seem to have trouble seeing this one, but there's a grating here in the sidewall. You can kind of see. Sure. And this works so nicely. All right, to tell you what, I'm going to pick a point over here just because I know that it works. I can see it more easy. I'll pick this point on the apex of this little curve here and say, all right, this survey point goes to that one. So the idea here is to pick points that you can see well in your scan data and have a survey measurement for, and go through and pick as many as you feel is necessary to get your scan data to line up with your survey data. So if I georeference at this point, I'm only moving it a few hundreds of meters maybe, or hundreds of feet, because I already georeferenced the scan data close to the survey data in this area. And it's running still. It's moving all of those scan data fairly precisely, rotating it, tilting it, doing what it needs to do to make sure that those points that I selected from the scans are laying more or less right on top of the 2 points that I measured, or that I have survey measurements for. If you pick as many as 12, it's obviously doing something more akin to a best fit of all the data so that it matches. Now, if you look on what I have here in this view, and I'll turn on for this view make sure I have everything selected, including all of my points and layers. In my 3D view, you'll see that the scan data fall quite closely to the survey data just from a georeferencing to total station and GPS data. And I can continue to add more and more points to aid that calculation to make it land very, very closely and right on top if I pick enough points of my survey data to marry those two together so that I now have precise scan work of all of this drainage structure and its underlying vertical walls and things like that. But I also have the benefit of having survey measurements below the water level. This is black because that was full of water. Surveyed below the water level down to the actual flow line of that ditch. So I have both kinds of data represented here, matched together. And this is just a demonstration of the technique. I'm not going to tell you this is the finest registered data right now, but I would use much more care typically than I just did to show you the technique.
So Richard, kind of a two-parter for georeferencing and for registration. Can you use targets such as flat black and whites or station setups? I can answer that one for the georeferencing, as long as you've got some sort of a survey measurement to marry the point cloud data to. Then yeah, absolutely. So if you've got a station setup over a known point, and you could see that point within the scan data from an SX10 or an S series instrument, then yeah, absolutely, you can use that for georeferencing. How about for registration?
Same kind of general idea. You don't have the ability to, what I would say, have the software detect targets and use the targets to create the move to points, so to speak. But certainly, if you had paper targets and you can see them clearly in your scans, that could help your point picks. In particular, I'll get to that just a minute and I'll explain a little bit farther. Okay, so that's the georeferencing part of the talk I wanted to show you. I also am going to do something similar where I'll be using the registration command inside TBC rather than the georeferencing command. It just lets me. It's much trouble moving the window today. There it is. So I'm going to grab this project and place it in here and show you a similar data set, but not exactly the same. Actually, it is exactly the same, but I hid some stuff from you. And use different kinds of data to do the work. So this is the same project area using the same data actually, but we really did use an SX10 on that as our total station. So we collected a couple scans, only a couple really, in this area out in the open area where the drainage is, to make sure that we could tie the SX10 data or to the X7 data and had enough overlap and enough scan points that could be easily picked to do the same sort of operation we just did with georeferencing with just survey data. We're going to do it this time with registration. But the first step I want to do is, because I'm still back at 000 with my imported X7 data, is again do a very quick georeference to make sure that those data fall where they're supposed to be. And I wanted to point out that this grouping of my X7 data during import was created during import so that all of the scans are moving together as a unified group. And when you have a registration group, you are operating on it as a unit, so to speak. You aren't modifying the relationship of the points in between the scan or the distances and things that in between the scans doing a registration. But I did want to make it clear that when I'm at 000, I'm applying the scale factor that exists at 000 in your project. And for a default project, that scale factor is 1. When you're doing a project, using a project like this that has a defined coordinate system, that origin is very far away from the scale factor 1 parallels in this Lambert conical Lambert system. So the scale factor is actually not 1 at the origin. But because the data are brought in and treated as ground and stored as ground, they can, wherever they're moved in the project, a combined scale factor can be applied to those data to provide proper elevation scaling and grid scaling for the scan data itself. This is, I believe, unique to TBC and unique to the industry for us being able to handle our scan data and put it together with survey data so that it matches correctly. That georeferencing didn't do any additional scaling except for the fact that it moved the scan data where it belonged, and proper geodetic scaling was applied for that location in the project. So right now I have 2 different scale factors on these scan data that you're seeing, but when I move the X7 data over into the project area, then a correct scale factor for that location in the zone will be applied. Okay. So I'm going to do the same general technique here. I'm just going to grab a scan point. I'm going to try to grab a survey point. I'm going to try to grab the same one that I grabbed before. It's a pretty good one for what I'm trying to do. And I'm going to be a little bit more careful perhaps in my picking just to move the data over, because once I get the data close, I can actually I can actually use the registration command to do that final bit of fitting of the data so that they tie together with the scan data from the SX10. So I'll hit georeference. You should, okay, and I will click on compute the project. Again, I could just close this actually. And it will move the data from the left to the proper scene on the right. So now I have the data. Let's see if I have that. Give me just a second. I'm going to open a 3D view so you can see exactly what I have here a little bit more carefully. And I'm going to use color-coded intensity, and I'm going to make sure that I'm in perspective view. So if you look at these data, if you look really carefully, you can see that I have 2 different data sets sitting on top of each other with regards to the scan data. It doesn't come in perfectly, and I see kind of 2 walls or 2 different bits of data. Oh, actually, it came in so well that it's hard to even see. Well, look again when I look at it in the registration command. Okay. Yeah. So I'll close this for now. I'll go in and actually change back from color-coded to true color and open the registration command and look at it there. That time it came in so closely that it actually was a little hard to pick up on that other view. Give me just a second. Now what this is doing is that this is opening up the pairwise registration command. So I have the data that comes from the SX10 on the left side here. You can see that it's kind of strong down in the intersection, which was really a prime focus for the survey part of this. And then it has a couple scans, a scan here and a scan here that allows me to tie the other data. On the right-hand side is the group that represents all of the X7 data together. So I have very strong measurements or number of measurements underneath of the road beds and through the tunnels, and a very, very high density of scans down in this area for showing to whatever engineer wanted to see it. So if I look at the bridge here, this might be one of the telling areas.
Yeah, so the purple is the moving station, is the X7 data, and the yellow colored point clouds is the SX10. Okay.
So this top of the wall and roadside part of the wall is the same wall as this wall. I used one point to georeference and it brought it close, but it didn't get it exactly where we want it. So if I go in and select points using the pairwise registration, I can marry these two together better than they are at this point. So I'm going to use that famous grate that I was unable to see a little bit earlier very well, and pick a point that marries up. And you do that down here with this picking tool that marries up this point on the grade and this point on the grade. So I'm identifying in both sets of scans the exact same point. Now, because I have this auto line checkbox checked, it isn't just using my pick as the unique point to use for calculating the transformation. It actually selects a large number of points around the point that I pick in both sets of data, and those data all together are used to try to find the best agreement between the two sets of scan data. Now, I have a lot of overlap in these scan data just from those two SX10 scans. So there's a lot for this engine to use to try to get the data to fit well together. So I'm going to leave that on. And if you're trying to work with very, very challenging data that has a lot of vegetation on two scans and not a lot of overlap, but you can see three unique points that you can pick very precisely, you could turn auto align off and use those 3 points that are exactly the same points in both sets of scans and have it perform the transformation satisfactorily. But most of the time, it's much easier just to let the system select a lot of points around where you do your point pick and let it pick a lot of points and put the data together. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to pick a point that's, I don't know, roughly back on that corner of that grading. And in my X7 data, I'll pick a point that's pretty much the same point, roughly. And it will use those and immediately go into a registration algorithm or routine and start registering the data together. So if it works well, what we should expect to see is that this wall should close back together and look more like a single unique wall than what it did just from the georeferencing that I did before. So it goes through, calcs the transformation, and then updates all my graphics and does the computation. Take just a second. There's quite a bit of scan data and they are a little bit off from each other at this point. We'll be patient, because every time I'm not patient, I mess it up.
So there's a question from Jefferson asking about system requirements. All of the TBC releases come with a set of release notes letting you know what we've added, and at the end of those release notes is the complete list of system requirements. We do suggest, I'll say, heightened specs for working with large data sets such as point cloud data and imagery, and I would recommend checking those out, short of me going on and on and on and on about what the system specs should be. So check out the release notes for your version of TBC to look at what the system specs should be, or check out the upcoming release notes for version 5.20.
So I'm going to pick another point, because one scan point, while it may be satisfactory for a lot of calculations, I tend to like to do more. And I have the ability to do 3 different points here. And if those 3 points fail to satisfy the need, and you can see just already from that 1 point pick that that wall came together quite nicely and is reflected in one wall. So my intent in this presentation is to show you the techniques that can be applied. Don't take the fact that I'm not going in and quadruple checking all of my data to make sure my registration is super tight. Mean that I don't care about such things. I'm just a little bit cramped for time. So you would want to go in and exercise care based upon whatever the requirements are for your survey to ensure that these scan data are lining up very precisely with one another, or carefully, and maybe do cross sections and limit boxes, section planes through different things to make sure that you're getting one wall instead of 2 closely spaced walls, and those sorts of things that can happen from poorly registered data. So once I'm done this, I'm going to basically say, all right, I'm pretty close. I have 2 points. Things are fitting together well. I mean, I've looked at this enough times to know those point picks usually result in a pretty good result. I can also go in and optimize the pair registration quickly, applying a different algorithm to the data to possibly move things even more tightly together and produce possibly even a better, lower residuals, better fit between the data sets. I've seen this optimized pair registration just kind of sequentially move things together to where they really, really nicely fit. That's one of the strongest algorithms I think we have for registration in the product. I really like the results that tend to come from it. So I'm letting it do one more, and then I'll go back to a 3D view so you can see how the survey data fit in this particular situation, because it's very, very close. The georeference that I did with 2 points was kind of close. This stuff comes out just from those 2 point picks very closely together.
Richard, this might be a stumper because I don't know the answer to this, but Mark asked, with the auto align using a much larger data set, you know, the context of point clouds around the point that you picked, approximately how large of an area is that extended?
I've heard people say a meter or 2. Do you know anything more about that?
I would say that you just don't have to be super precise. That's the whole point. So if you're a foot, close enough, a foot is close enough. A meter, that might be pushing it.
Okay.
But it really depends on your data. If you pick a tree, well, that's going to be very challenging anyway. If you pick a nice corner on a building, well, that's going to be a lot easier. And maybe a meter will be just fine on a corner like that.
So just kind of along that same vein, using the auto align tool, it's often enough if you have nice planar surfaces in your project to pick something that's, it surrounded by a fair bit of that surface, like, kind of a middle of a wall kind of a thing, and pick another point that's roughly somewhere nearby on that same wall, because the data that it does grab is defining a fairly nice plane that it can use to help in the registration process. And you have 3 points. The best way you can register if it's struggling with just 1 point or 2 is to try to pick all 3 kinds of planes to control all 3 directions of movement. So if you have a ground, a wall on the north side and a wall on the east side, those 3 are almost sure to probably make things fit together much more easily than if you're trying to pick 3 points in a line on the west wall or something like that. And so if you look at the results of this thing, I have pretty tight fit now between the 2 different colors or the 2 different sets of scans, and I could go in and look at the road surfaces and things like that, and they overlap. I can assure you, I've done this many, many times. They overlap quite well, and you'd be hard-pressed to find very many surfaces in all of these scans, and there are almost 70 scans here that aren't fitting together quite well from these kinds of processes. So I'll open up a 3D view really quick, just so you can see it, and we're near the finish here. So in my 3D view, which I'll float again so you can see it full screen, I'll make it perspective view. I'll turn on true color because it looks nice, and I think that's good enough. And in that 3D view, I have actually all the raw data turned on, and I'll turn off close my registration. because it's making it challenging for me to look at my 3D view. And I'll turn on the points again. Hello. I'll turn on my points again. And my layers, so you can see in the 3D view this survey data, and show you that it again has married the data successfully together. Perspective, so it's a long zoom. It's married those data together well, and we have a nice overlap between this X7 data and the survey.
Yeah, and talking about overlap, Sharif asked a good question. And in the registration command, you may have seen in the lower right corner, there was a percentage showing 3.85% overlap. That is not an absolute value. So that's not to say that 3.85% of the two scans that you were trying to register together overlap. That is to be used as kind of a relative indication, and would suggest using other tools, specific areas like Richard was looking at the grading and things on that bridge there to see how well these scans are mirrored up and aligned to each other.
Okay, so that's really pretty much what I had to show, and open up for any more additional questions you might have. This technique is pretty well founded on a long history of doing registration in our products. Trimble RealWorks has been doing this kind of stuff. So the technology you're seeing, although it's being advanced for the X7 in the field, is based on a long history of providing these kinds of tools.
Great.
Okay, and if you'd like, I can go back to the closing discussion, and you can talk through.
Yeah, so as you can see, and thank you, Richard, you did a great job of showcasing how well this X7 and perspective data is supported within existing TBC constructs and registration tools and techniques. The scanning module will be required for registration, georeferencing, and feature extraction. I mentioned that. So Richard was running TBC version 520, Survey Advanced Edition with the scanning module, and 520 will be available soon. I also want to recognize, I didn't mention, Arnaud Boujra is here. He is the TBC engineering manager. You may have noticed a nice French accent with one of the questions that was answered. Thank you for joining us, Arnaud. You can see, with past power hours, it's been me and some poor guy that I've recruited to do these power hours, but this has been such a group effort with international effort from Trimble, with teams all over the world, and everybody's getting involved here. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Arnaud, for joining with this power hour. So hopefully we've gotten the creative juices flowing and gotten your interest. If you want to know more, check out our TBC webpage that will have all sorts of details on everything TBC, utilities, help, white papers, downloads, and customer testimonials and success stories. Also, we encourage you to check out our YouTube channel that has now 270 plus and growing videos organized in workflow-based playlists. This playlist in particular worth checking out for this power hour will be the Point Clouds playlist that has 29 videos that are of various lengths, but usually just a couple minutes long, that will break down a specific function or feature in TBC. And I should mention, as we're throwing all these long URLs in front of you, the presentation here will be available with the recording of this. So like any of all of the past Power Hours, I believe we started these in August of 2015. So we are over 50 of these sessions that are all available. Take a workflow, take a project, a real world project data set, break it down for you, 45, 50 minutes, ask questions. Those are all available for free on demand as you wish.
And you can get to it through geospatial.trimble.com as well.
And you can get through it through geospatial.trimble.com, or there's a Power Hour Vault page maintained on the community here that's shown now.
Yep.
That's a user forum where you can post questions, interact directly with the TBC and Trimble team, as well as other users. It's really nice to see heightened involvement from users answering other users' questions, which is really nice to see, really building the strong community there. So next steps, we've got TBC version 5.10 in red there. That is the latest version, but like we mentioned a couple times, 5.20 will be out shortly, and that is what you would need with the X7. But you can download 5.10 today from our homepage, trimble.com/TBC. You can get a free 30-day demo license from your local Trimble distribution partner. If you don't know who that is, we've got a very handy locator. You can see there all of the flags there on the map. We are worldwide. There will be somebody there in your region to help you out with getting you set up for TBC. And I think we've got one more. Always like to do this to tease the next slide, next Power Hour. This is the season of new and exciting TBC or Trimble product releases that have some way or another ties to TBC. We saw how that is with the X7. Another one as a standalone product or as a publishing routine from TBC version 5.20 is Trimble Clarity. We just released that this week. We've got John Fomby, who is the product manager of Trimble Clarity, signed up to do a illustration of the workflow of publishing data to Trimble Clarity from TBC on Wednesday, November 20th. That is a week earlier than usual. Usually we're the last Wednesday of the month. There is a U.S. holiday, Thanksgiving, on the last Thursday of the month, so we're doing it a week earlier. That'll be Wednesday, November 20th. Look for the registration link coming very soon. And if you want to learn more about Trimble Clarity, like I said, we just released it a couple of days ago. Visit clarity.trimble.com for more information. So I think with that, I want to thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Arnaud. Thank you especially to Richard. Great job, man. Hope you enjoyed this session, and we look forward to hearing from you, and hopefully you're looking forward to getting your X7 and getting the X7 data into Trimble Business Center. Anything else, guys, on the call?
Thanks, everyone.
Oh, good job, Richard. Thanks, Joe.
All right. We'll talk to you soon, and we'll see you next month for Trimble Clarity and TBC.